Was that the ECB's resolve starting to break a little bit, Vince?
I think so. I mean, they're basically sending the dogs out ahead of Draghi next week because you generally don't see this type of intervention coming from the central banker himself. You would see the same thing with Yellen's administration, where Dudley might say something, Fisher might say something. Hardly ever see Yellen speaking about the currency. This is exactly the same situation.
Yeah.
He won't talk about it next week, but he will talk about inflation, and he will talk about how a currency strengthening will make it more difficult for them.
Subadra, are you expecting any changes from the ECB next week? No one's expecting base case a change to the guidance, but maybe a tweak to the guidance of the guidance, if that makes any sense at all, after we got the accounts of the last ECB meeting.
I think next week's meeting is a little too early. Probably sometime in the first half, we could see a change in the forward guidance. Clearly, last week's ECB minutes was hawkish, but it's a tightrope that the ECB has to walk, where they have to sort of balance expectations and the market moves on the euro versus their their need to turn somewhat a little bit more hawkish. And it's tough because you have, as soon as the euro starts to strengthen,
yeah,
that starts making it difficult for them to reach their inflation mandate.
So we've got this really interesting dynamic in the bond market I want to talk to you about, Subadra. At the front end, Bunds versus Treasury, super wide.
Yep.
Super wide. But then when you compare the shape of the curve, the Bund curve is twice as steep as the Treasury curve. Is there a story there, and what is it?
Well, it's basically telling you that in the back end especially, bond yields are, the Bund Treasury spread to me is extraordinarily wide.
Yeah. Close
to 200 basis points. To me, that spread has to normalize a little bit. Typically, historically, that spread has been in and around 100 to 150 basis points, and now we've been sort of around 200 basis points. So to me, that spread needs to narrow. And in the front end, I mean, the Europe has negative rates, the US doesn't. The US is pricing in 2.5 rate hikes for this year. And we're just in a different regime, so you should expect some divergence in the front end of the yield curve. It's the back end of the yield curve where I see the possibility for more convergence between Europe and the US.
If we do finally get a repricing at the front end, Vince, is that just more fuel for the strong euro story?
Well, it's not just a strong euro story. It's actually a weak dollar story, which is really the problem. And I think that's what caught the ECB officials on a bit of a back foot. They wanted to come out positive last week. They weren't necessarily concerned about the hawkish message because they were trying to get the message across that Europe was definitely improving, the economy is improving, and they felt that at some point in the near future they could pull back a little bit. But then you get this blast of the dollar gets sunk, the euro goes up a lot higher than they probably expected. I think that caught them on the back foot, and I think that's why they're taking a little bit of a back pedal.